Welcome to a short video lecture on how to measure pressure. And the idea of measuring pressure now has actually been around for quite a long time. Without further ado, here we go. Alright, a few pressure gauges. Starting off on the left, this here is a barometer. 29.9 inches is atmospheric pressure at sea level. What happens is air pressure pushes down onto the open side of the mercury, that's on the two outer parts. The middle tube follows along a kind of measuring stick, and as the air pressure changes, it either forces more mercury up into the bulb towards that vacuum, or if the air pressure decreases, then the mercury kind of falls downward. And we can measure the change in air pressure based on the corresponding rod or measurements on the stick. To the right, we have a tire pressure gauge. It's the upper right-hand corner. It measures the pressure in a tire. It does this by the air pressure inside. It applies a force on a spring, which is calibrated, so that there's a little measuring stick that, depending on the pressure, it pushes the stick in or out, depending on how much pressure there is. In the bottom is a manometer, kind of an interesting name. It's just a U-shaped tube where if you have different pressures on the two different sides of the tube, you can measure which one's a high pressure and which one's a low pressure based on that. So for example, in this case, the high pressure would be on the right side because it's pushing that liquid further down and up into almost into that the ball there. So this is used to measure gas or a lot of different things, especially in medical theaters. You can read on your own about how each individual gauge works, but the big thing to understand is that each gauge measures a difference in pressure between the gauge and the atmosphere. This is the idea of a gauge pressure, the difference between whatever you're measuring and atmospheric pressure. A gauge will say zero pressure when whatever it is that you're measuring is at or equal to atmospheric pressure. That would be 1.01 times 10 to the 5th pascals, or 29 inches barometric pressure, and going on from there. The example of a flat tire would have no reading. It would have a zero gauge reading because the pressure inside is the same as the pressure on the outside. Once again, gauge pressure is the difference between the pressure of the object you are measuring and the atmosphere. So the gauge pressure is pressure inside the object minus the atmospheric pressure. Depends on the different units. Most of the time we will use pascals, which is the atmospheric pressure at sea level for a normal day is 1.013 times 10 to the 5th pascals. You could have it in 760 millimeters of mercury, or barometric pressure for weather is often given as atmospheric pressure at sea level is given as 29.9 inches. That's for the U.S. That's the equivalent of 760 millimeters. Yeah, here we go. Atmospheric pressure. Awesome. Different units. Great.
Hello. I just wanted to show you a really quick and simple pressure gauge that I made for measuring atmospheric pressure. A little meteorology background too. So high pressure systems, those are generally cold. They're actually all cold fronts. And they come in, and this is when you have thunderstorms. Another way to tell them is they are generally those little wispy clouds up in the sky. And from that we'll have, it's not a cold pressure system doesn't necessarily mean cold weather. It just means, or a cold front, excuse me, doesn't mean cold weather. It just means that there's a high pressure system coming through. It generally means that the air it's drier, it's sunnier, it's more you'll get that partly cloudy. A low pressure system or a warm front, these generally are storms. This is where you will get the lower pressure brings in with it moisture, and this is usually the fronts combined together, and that's when you get the storms. Is on the edges of the fronts, on the front and the back. Right now we're probably in this is looking outside, cloudy, overcast day. It's a low pressure system. Another thing about high pressure is it's generally clear days. All right, so what I have here is I believe this is an Erlenmeyer flask. My chemistry may be a little bit off. What I've done is I've just put some water in it, and I've dyed the water, and I have a tube going into it, and I've a rubber stopper on the top, and I have the water up here at some level. Now, the dye is just so you can see it. I didn't make a vacuum in here. I didn't pump the air out. You could have gone through the process of doing that, but it's just not. It's hard to do, and I wanted to do this really quickly. Now, as the pressure outside changes, so outside, as the atmospheric pressure changes, there is a different pressure exerted on the water in the tube. And for a higher pressure system, the water will be pushed further down. And for a lower pressure system, we have it, as you see here, the water is pretty high up the tube. Now, I can just take a simple little ruler and just start marking it. And so every day I come up with some sort of orientation of whether the high pressure, what that is for our system. So this is just kind of an idea here where we have some pressure exerted on the outside of this tube, and then there's a bigger opening in here where there's going to be some other pressure on the inside. So that's what we have here, little simple weather gauge for measuring pressure. Hopefully you enjoy this video, and come and see me tomorrow and ask any questions. Thank you very much, and without further ado, the review question.
Quick little question I'd like you to do after watching this is I'd like you to go either in your textbook or online and just do a little research about blood pressure. How's it measured? What is done in order to take your blood pressure? And kind of my goal here is to kind of make you a little self-conscious about your health and moving forward from here. So what is the, I'm going to butcher these words here, but systolic pressure, what is the diastolic pressure, and what are the two values measured in? For example, a healthy person has 120 over 80. You hear that as a blood pressure. What does that actually mean? I really want you to kind of like understand what those values really mean. All right? Thank you very much. Have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow in class.